Welcome to the Land Broker Insider Podcast, your real estate masterclass. Kasey Mock and his team are ready to dig into the proven models and systems that have propelled Mock Ranches to nearly $1 billion in Texas real estate sales, and to be recognized twice as an Apex Land Broker of the Year. This is where we don't earn the right to learn. Here we learn together, so we have the right to earn. The Land Broker Insider Podcast starts right now.
We'll just jump right into it, right? I just got back from Austin for 2 days. I was with Gary Keller and a group of other agents. Gary's always, for the last 10 years, I've been in business with him for like 14 years, real estate for 11. And 10 years of that, I've been able to sit in what he calls his top 100 mastermind group, which is the top 100 agents and teams inside of KW. They'll meet on a quarterly basis, just to kind of open forum mastermind. It's somewhat facilitated, like current events, rates, challenges. We've got a big research team that will present some things, and you're looking at business models that are working. Fortunately, you guys have a really big firm, so you're able to build models and systems that work, and it'd be great if everybody adopted those. So KW does the same thing. We'll see what's working for teams and compare those. But I realized in this last couple of months in our business, it actually, Tyler, I had some ahas when you and I and Dean and Dan and Trent and Seth met in San Antonio, just about as business professionals in this space, we can broker business in the traditional way. And a lot of people do that and have a lot of success. We've had a tremendous amount of success in the last 10 years, brokering business in the traditional, conventional way. You represent a buyer, you represent a seller in a real estate transaction and go. And I think you guys in Florida, us here, strive to be the very best in that relationship. And I think, arguably, there's a few brokers and teams that would do it as good as we do, but not many that do it better. You're probably in the top of that. And I'm not saying that to be out. Yeah, I mean, it's, if you strive for perfection, there's a lot of people that are performing at a really, really high level and a bunch that aren't. And we're certainly in the ones that do. But when we look at and spend time with people like Dean and Dan and Seth and this room I was just in, you start to look at, that's just the brokerage side is just one component of this business. It's one component of how we might build wealth. It's also just one component of how we could serve our clients. And so, we're looking at adding in quite a bit more of an investment arm, an investment component of our business, just to provide more people with the opportunity to invest in this asset. But also, like when the market's down, not everybody wants a $5 million playground.
Correct.
But there's a lot of people that would invest in land right now knowing that next 3 years, 5 years, it's going to be really good.
Right. Do you feel like it's a balance for you guys? I know it is for us, of being really good at one thing and trying to be the best at it, trying not to totally reinvent the wheel, right? We're not trying to revolutionize the industry or do anything like that, but try to be a little bit better at it than our competition. And trying to continually push what we're doing to kind of the next level, right? Dean's been at this for 30 years and he's always trying to get better. And that's something that I've kind of learned, right? Just because we had a great year last year, doesn't mean we need to do the exact same stuff, right? We need to keep trying to improve, keep trying to get better. And so for us, you mentioned it about some of these other service lines or other ways to serve clients or other ways to kind of monetize the real estate business of what we do. For us, it's always been, and we started to dip our toe in the water in some of these other things that you mentioned, but let's be really good at one thing and not try to be everything to everybody, but at the same time, trying to get into some of these other service lines, things that are complementary, things that kind of cross-pollinate. So it's always been a balance for us of, I don't want to lose sight of who we are and what we do and what we've done to make us successful, but also knowing that we have to continually change and evolve as an organization and with some of the other things that we should be doing to service clients. And with whatever their needs are in the land industry, not just buying and selling, but managing, doing appraisals, which we're trying to kind of consider doing some things like that, um, just other ways that we can serve our existing book of business and continuing to make our business better without totally forgetting about what got us here in the first place, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. There's a lot of wisdom in that. If I had my office totally set up, I could pull a book out. But I don't know if you've read Gary Keller's book, The One Thing. It speaks to that. It's not that you only do one thing, but gosh, if you're going to be a high performer, be the best at something. And so we know what's gotten us to this point, 10 plus years, over $1 billion in sales. You guys did what, 500 million last year, something like that. Crazy, huge number. And so you're doing something really well. There's no reason to totally invent yourself, I don't think. For us, there's certainly not a reason to totally invent ourselves, but our industry's changing.
It is.
Rapidly. And just the pace at which people take in information, the information that's available to them. And that's been about a 5 or 6 year trend of people having just continually more and more and more information, and more of the vendors that you and I would use on a daily basis are actually trying to be more consumer facing and provide more data to the consumer. And so the professional real estate brokers and agents have separated from the masses. But now we throw AI into it. And the massive aggregation of data that's available to people there. It's changing. It's a changing industry.
It is. And I think you have to stay on top of the changes, right? And learn to embrace them.
Correct.
And lean into them and think about ways to implement them. But you also can't go so extreme on data and AI and those kind of things that you make bad decisions or try to cut corners with it. It's a balance of let's get more efficient, let's use it here and there. But, I don't want to do what some of the residential brokerages did in terms of using AI to automate purchases of residential real estate that now they're kind of belly up on a little bit. So, it's like there's horror studies with all of this, right? And it's a matter of learning from some of the people that have gone a little bit too far with it. Everything's good in moderation, right? So, moderation in terms of implementing new things, but also sticking to what we know and do and kind of the process that's worked to this point.
Yeah, I saw a Instagram reel. There's all these people that have they ever sold a piece of real estate? I have no idea, but they put reels out. And this guy puts out a reel and says, why AI is going to put a lot of real estate agents out of business. And the basis of the reel was, if you're not using AI to review your contracts, it might put you out of business. And I just posted on that reel. I said, if a licensed real estate agent or broker needs AI to review their contracts, they need to be out of business, and it's not AI's fault.
Right. Yeah. There's certain things like that we've started using it for, which has been helpful in terms of some of those things, right? Like, we've started using it just personally on some stuff to if you're trying to look through an old PDF from years ago that's scanned and you can't find whatever it is, and it's a couple 100-page document, like that can help. We're trying to quickly identify the right section in a 60-page contract that, hey, what's the section of this that addresses X, Y, and Z? Like stuff that you can quickly kind of dig in and find on some of those more customized contracts compared to the standard state ones that we all know what paragraph 23 says in those things, right, or whatever. So, to your point, it's not trying to get AI to do our job, but finding ways to help use it to make us better.
Right. Tell me about Saunders Real Estate, Tyler. Switch topics a little bit. I was very impressed with what you guys have done, what Dean has done. Known Dean for, 10 years, I guess. As long as I've been involved with RLI, he's always been a leader in that organization. So I'd love to visit about Saunders, but about Southeast land investments, what people were looking at there, what kind of assets you trade in. Talk to us about that market. It's different for us here in Texas. A lot of overlap of people's.
Some similarities, some differences for sure. So we were founded almost 30 years ago, as you mentioned, by Dean Saunders. Dean worked as the agricultural liaison policy guy for Lawton Childs, who was U.S. Senator and also governor of Florida. And so Dean was uh, working on behalf of the governor and senator on ag issues and getting to know a lot of the larger agriculture owners and players in the state. And so then fast forward several years later, Dean decided to start a land firm because he realized a lot of these large landowners weren't being serviced in the way that they needed to. And he already knew a lot of them. And so our origins are very much rooted in agriculture land, farmland, what's remaining of citrus in Florida. But as you know, Florida 30 years ago is very different than Florida now. And so, what used to be 1,000 acres of citrus on Highway 27 in the middle part of the state is now 1,000 acres of mixed use development with retail frontage and apartments and houses and big box retail and all that. And so Dean kind of saw that trend and said, hey, we need to evolve as a firm and be able to service these landowners, these clients of ours with whatever they need. And so from there, it evolved into helping them on development land projects, which then evolves into commercial assets. And so we're still probably 80 to 90% of our revenue is generated from land and transitional land and ag land and things like that. And then we do have a commercial arm as well. We've got offices in Tampa, Lakeland, where we're headquartered, and then Orlando, and then one in Lake City, Thomasville, Georgia. Just opened one last year in Arkansas, and have added a couple people in North Carolina and Alabama as well. So we're certainly not where we want to be yet in those states, but we're trying to do things the right way. And, when we go into a market over time, we want to not just say we're in a state with one or two agents, but we really want to grow a team there, service landowners there, build relationships in the ag and land communities in those markets. And all the growth outside of Florida is primarily land focused. Not saying we can't do commercial in some of these markets, because if you're going to be in, certain southeastern markets that are high growth and transitional in nature, it makes sense to do a lot of that kind of work. And it's very similar to what we do in Florida. So we're kind of letting land be the leader in terms of going into some new markets. And then once we build up market share, once we build relationships and add team members, commercial can kind of ride the wake a little bit and come behind it. But we also have a land management division. We manage about 30,000 acres right now in Florida. We're looking to grow that. I think that's a big opportunity. Then we have a commercial management platform and manage 40 or 50 retail shopping centers, industrial parks, things like that here in Florida. So that's grown a lot over the last several years, which is great from a business model standpoint because it's predictable income, things like that. Compared to the brokerage business, as you know, it can be a little bit up and down and a lot of things outside your control from a revenue perspective. So, looking to continue to grow the brokerage arm of what we do, especially the land brokerage arm into some other southeastern markets, and do it the right way, be thorough about how we do it, try to build long-lasting teams, long-lasting relationships, and then from there bring land management, some commercial opportunities, things like that to the table as well.
On the farm management, are you managing cultivation, cows, citrus, all the above, hunting, timber? What do you manage, Tyler?
Not timber. We manage a lot of stuff in Florida. Is a little bit of everything. So a lot of the farms we manage have, some production agriculture component to it, row crop type stuff, and really it's managing leases. We're not really managing stuff that we're directly farming or anything, but it's typically managing leases, managing improvements, that sort of thing. And there's a decent amount of hunting leases as well on these properties, some cattle. It's kind of a little bit of a mix, not much citrus anymore. One of the properties we manage has a little bit that's left. But that we can get into the citrus industry in Florida. It's pretty sad what's happened over the last 10 or 20 years, and the direction that things are headed is not great. But that's been the biggest change in the state from a land perspective and agriculture perspective by far over the last decade or two. And So we're building teams based in each of these places that we're going into, and trying to get people who are product specialists in those crops and those types of assets. And each market's a little bit different in terms of what we're doing, and the types of crops that we're working with, and farming seasons and those kind of things can vary a little bit.
Florida is similar to Texas. Florida saw a big boom just in the COVID era, being conservative state. And or do you foresee that kind of return, Tyler? I mean, what's been in the last 5 years, what's been the appreciation or the increase in value for ground in Florida? And I'm not asking about, stuff right up against Orlando, but just if somebody's buying, investing in raw land in Florida, how good's that been? Do you continue to see that as a strong investment?
Yeah, I think it's been really interesting. I mean, like Texas and some other markets in 2021, 2022, there was just an insane amount of population growth here. What's been interesting has been the amount of wealth that's relocated to Florida in general. I read something, I don't mean this against Texas, but the amount of wealth that relocated to Florida in 21 and 22 was like 4 times the amount of wealth that relocated to Texas. Texas had more people go to Texas, but Florida had more high net worth individuals and things like that. And so what we've kind of tracked a little bit we have a big research team. We have 7 or 8 guys that's all they do is research and verify sales and help us put together some of our market reports, and kind of then transition into brokerage from there once they've learned the industry and things like that. So we track all this data, and kind of what we found is, despite challenging conditions right now, I mean, in the last couple of years, commodity prices have not been good. Interest rates are high. Big tracts have still moved in Florida, like large institutional level tracts have moved. Pretty much in all asset classes, whether it's productive farmland, timber, master plan community development land which is a big transition use for cattle in Central Florida. We've sold several of those sites this year, and demand, even in these high interest rate environments, is there. A lot of these groups that are looking to invest in Florida, they're looking to park big chunks of capital in the state, and they have a long-term horizon on it. And I think, even if they're buying a number now, in 10 years, that number, should go up. Everything else held steady. So a lot of these groups have long-term time horizons, and it's because of the population growth, the demand on transitional land, the amount of land that the state's conserving every year, which is a lot, although not enough. I think people look at it a little bit from a supply-demand lens of, every year there's less land available in Florida because of development pressure and conservation work and things like that. So we're seeing, and the other part of it is on the timber side of what we do. I think the amount of people and wealth that have relocated to the state of Florida, and ranches are factored into this too, kind of the ranch rec, timber rec stuff. People still want to be able to get outside those cities and still have a place to go on the weekends and go shoot guns or go do whatever. So what we're seeing a lot of is stuff transitioning out of probably the institutional timber world kind of into your high net worth recreational buyer. And I think a lot of that in Florida has been driven by the amount of wealth of people that have come back down here, moved down here, and they want something close by within a couple hours to go mess around on, whether it's a ranch or hunting land or whatever. So that's kind of keeping pricing fairly steady. I mean, farmland's declined a little bit over the last 2 or 3 years from what it was a couple of years ago, but I think that's more commodity pricing. Impact of citrus has presented some challenges. But overall, the market in Florida has done better than other counterpart states that we work in. And I think it's because it's a place that people want to live and want to park money.
Why do you think the wealth has come there and left Texas, or more so than Texas?
You want me to turn this camera around and I'll show you the beach I'm at right now? I really think that's part of it, right? Like I love Texas. I was born in Houston, which is a little known fact. I only lived there a year or two, but I love Florida. I mean, I love Texas, but Florida has the beaches, and I think that's a big attraction for people. It's not so much me. I don't love it quite as much as my wife and others do, but not that Texas doesn't have beaches, but they're a little bit different. And I think depending on the part of Texas too, the weather can be a little bit better here than there. Just depends on where you're at, obviously. Um, but yeah, I think the proximity to the coast is probably the biggest reason, if I had to guess on it.
Yeah, I think they're true to that. I was with a guy yesterday in Austin. He lives in Miami. I'm trying to find his name for you because I just don't remember what his name was. I'll send it to you. Lives in Miami, but his business is in Boston. He's a developer in Boston, buys lots, tears them down, puts new units on them in Boston. It's doing well. He's an agent that is involved with KW. He's got 100 and some odd projects going today. His profit margins are great. He left Boston, moved to Florida because he wanted to live on the beach. That's it.
And I think one of the other things too, not that Texas doesn't have a lot of this, but Latin America, South America, the Caribbean, like Miami, Florida in general is kind of in some ways the hub, right? It's like Miami's the Wall Street for South America in a lot of ways, in Latin America. And so, that's a neat culture. It generates a lot of, even growth from Miami, people moving up to Central Florida where we live. And so it's neat. Florida's so diverse in a lot of ways. I didn't fully, always knew that, but the population growth here is, I kind of joke that, I grew up in between Birmingham and Atlanta. Like I've born in Texas, lived in Florida, Georgia, Tennessee, Alabama, kind of all over a little bit. And Florida, Central Florida, where we lived probably 50 years ago, was very Southern in nature, and it's still very ag in certain areas. But the amount of population growth here and people come from all over that it's very much a melting pot culturally, which is fun. Like I like learning about different cultures and eating different food and things like that. And so it's just a really interesting market, and that creates a really interesting market from a real estate perspective where there's so much going on. The running joke at our firm is that from our guys that are outside of Florida, they just refer to, that's a high fence listing. Right. Like if it's in Central Florida, if it's in Florida in general, they just call it the high fence. Right. They're like, once you get outside the high fence tower, you got to firm needs to think about things a little bit differently. And so I think there's probably some parallels to that's actually a pretty good comparison.
Yeah, that's a really good comparison. And the weather's definitely killer good. We already hit 100 degrees here, and I'm 5 hours from the coast, So it'll get hot and dry, and groundwater's a challenge. Our growth here, that's the biggest thing our growth here is presented is transportation and water.
Mm-hmm.
And we surged so much. I'm curious to see if you guys mirrored this, but we surged so much in the last 4 years that debt to income ratio got a little bit out of whack.
Yeah.
We had a lot of families moving to Texas to work.
Mm-hmm.
But debt to income ratio got a little bit out of whack as prices of things went up. Lifestyle, today people prioritize lifestyle so much over investments so much. Mm-hmm. So you start to feel that at what I'd call our volume clients, like the $1 million clients that can buy $1 million place. And that's always a want to. It's a lifestyle purchase. If you're buying $1 million place to live, 10 acres with a house and an arena, maybe 20 acres of the place you can hunt and live there. It's not something you have to have. You're choosing to prioritize that, but it's expensive. Yeah, it's an expensive lifestyle.
Yeah. And I think one thing you mentioned, utilities and impact of keeping up with infrastructure growth and zoning, and just it's been interesting over the last 5 years. What the municipalities that were kind of pro growth when all the growth was happening now are like, whoa. We want to grow, but I don't know if we want to grow this much this quick, right? It's like, how do you balance, like Lakeland, where we live, for example, Publix is headquartered here. It's a really neat city, great culture, very close-knit community, but it's one of the fastest growing cities in the country and the fastest growing county in the country. And so how do you preserve what makes a town special and an area special and a culture special while you strategically plan out accommodating all this growth, right? You got to supply housing. You can't shut it off. You can't do moratoriums because that makes it harder for the existing people that have lived in Lakeland from a pricing standpoint. It just, the amount of money coming in, it just drives everything up and it pushes people out. So it's balancing all those things. And it's been kind of fascinating to see the race for infrastructure, the race for development land, the race for and kind of the pushback on certain projects here and there, and just kind of the talk in communities like this of, man, it's growing real fast. Like, it's good. I say it's good for business, bad for quality of life. Although there's good things that come from it. I don't mean it that way, but there's a lot of people, and a lot more people now where we live than there was 5 or 6 years ago.
I want to talk about conservation a little bit and acres that are staying open. You mentioned conservation. I know that's something that Dean had gone to DC and worked on with Dan. Talk about that. You say the state is pushing that conservation and prioritizing.
Correct. So when Dean was actually in office, he was in the state House of Representatives in Florida. He drafted, he saw the writing on the wall with development land and the growth of the state, and said, how can we pay landowners to not develop their properties? And so, it took a lot of work and trying to get the environmentalists and the landowners and everybody on the same page, but it's really turned. So he drafted a lot of that policy. Funding has not always been consistent over the years, but the state itself will buy conservation easements from owners, and that's unique to Florida. Florida's been a pioneer in that. Some other states have some programs that are similar. Some states have voluntary easements, but nobody has this thing really built out like Florida. I mean, the last few years, Florida's put hundreds of millions of dollars into this program every year, and there's a whole application process and ranking process and boundaries where funding is approved for certain properties. And so we do a lot of that work, representing landowners, navigating the complexities of that. The more these easements are in perpetuity. The more restrictive they are, obviously, the more valuable they are. But that's money that landowners can access, and ensuring that their property is never developed. They continue to farm their property. You can do carve outs for housing. Hey, I want my kids in the future to be able to build 2 cabins here. Okay, let's carve that out. And typically these easements are fairly flexible. Like, as long as you're farming the property and not putting it in development, all those kind of things, like, that's typically acceptable. And so it's very different when you talk to people that have one view of conservation easements from another part of the country, and they view it from a NGO perspective or from the syndicated kind of bullcrap easements that people were trying to push for years, compared to what we do in Florida. And I think a lot of these other southern states, Atlanta or Georgia in particular, given the growth in Georgia, the demand on land, the population growth in Georgia, they need to look at Florida's model and adopt something similar. And it's great for the state's perspective. It used to be years ago, they would prefer to do fee simple deals. And so the state bought up a lot of land fee simple. And then they said, well, when we buy something fee simple, we then have to manage it as a state. So that's another burden on taxpayer dollars. It takes more, it takes the property off the tax rolls, et cetera, et cetera. And so they kind of made a shift over the years to not buying fee simple land, but buying just the development right to the property, right? Putting a perpetual conservation easement on it, stays on the tax rolls, albeit at a lower value, but the property owner continues to manage the land, farm the land, and they can trade those remainder rights, right? Like you can still sell the remainder rights. We do a lot of remainder right work, and that works well on timber tracts, hunting, recreation timber tracts, right? In particular, and there are other ways too, and ranches and that sort of thing. But for people who want to get outside and go hunt, like, okay, you can't build on it, or you can't build more on it, but if it already has a cabin on it and things like that, some of these pieces of property are not even close to development pressure now, maybe in 50 years or 100 years. So there's typically a pretty strong market for remainder right deals. Just depends on the asset, the location. But
and remainder rights, meaning you're selling a surface. It's encumbered, but you're selling a surface.
Correct. And the amount of rights that are left vary, right? Mineral rights and things like that. But typically it's the right to use the property, the right to farm it, the right to blah, 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 just not the right to develop it, right? And so that's the most common one. And what's really good about the easement programs in Florida, the way they're structured, is that money that a landowner gets from an easement is 1031able. So we work with a lot of landowners who say, okay, I need to put an easement on my property. It helps me solve estate tax situations, or we're land rich, cash poor. This will lock in the value. I can get this money. I can use it to pay the estate taxes or whatever, right? It opens the door to a lot of tax planning opportunities. But from a 1031 perspective, we help people buy something, do an easement, get funds, 1031 those funds into another piece of land to grow kind of their land holdings, or a lot of our clients say, I own enough land, right? Like I don't need any more land. Let's take that money. This is where the commercial arm of what we do comes into play. And let's go allocate these funds into triple net leased Dollar Generals or retail strip centers. We can manage them. We can help guide them through that process to create some mailbox money, passive income.
You're putting them into that Dollar General or that location. You're not putting them into a DST.
No. We're putting them into a specific deal. Typically, although we have done some DST work, but typically people want to buy something that they know what they're buying and they can drive by it and they can see it. And that's from a landowner perspective, typically that's easier for them to and they just want to go see it, right? I own that Dollar General on the corner, on this, Chick-fil-A in Lakeland, ground lease, whatever. Like, they like being able to see and touch what they own. And DSTs are kind of there's a lot of benefits to DSTs, but we haven't done as much of that work, partially because our clients aren't as comfortable with it, just because it's kind of the diversification I've found doesn't always, while it makes sense to certain people and is the right play for some people, a lot of our clients like to know exactly what they're buying and know the exact market that they're buying it in. And then we can manage it. So we can take the burden off for them. And that generates cash flow that a lot of them use to kind of offset some of their farming operations, things like that. So that cycle has been good. But Florida, if you look at the land value appreciation over the last 20 years compared to the amount of funding that's going into conservation now compared to then, they're a fourth short. They need to be putting $1 billion into these funds every year just to keep up, not to grow conservation efforts from 20 years ago, but just to keep up with the amount of acres that are being conserved, because it's a whole appraisal process. There's 2 appraisals that have to be done at least. And but typically, we tell people, if you compare what an easement value is, and this can all fluctuate, right? But ballpark, it's 40 to 50% of a fee simple value. So you buy a piece of farmland for 10 grand, 15 grand an acre, and you can get about half that back in the easement. So, or 40% of it back in the easement. So it's meaningful dollars, and it doesn't work for everybody, but for people who it makes sense for, it can help alleviate a lot of issues and generate some liquidity for other investments or estate tax planning, things like that.
Yeah. We do a bunch of conservation work here in Texas. And I guess I started working on conservation easements 12 or 13, 14 years ago. I'd have to look back exactly. Then it was from a consultant side. We managed them. We had some partners that would facilitate the conservation easement, work with the land trust, raise the money, do the legal side, and then we would manage them. And then as we got into brokerage in Texas being such a conservative property owner state, being 96% privately held, the conservation easement places were hard to sell for a long time. And we don't have the state funding like you had. So, some of the bigger land trusts and donors to those land trusts have been Hill Country Conservancy. They do a great job here, but they have a pretty specific area that's over the Edwards Aquifer, our predominant aquifer here in the state. So Hill Country Conservancy have tried to work to preserve, to purchase conservation and preserve lands over that aquifer, particularly in certain recharge portions of it. Our aquifers here tend to recharge through karst limestone features. And so impervious cover is how they would regulate that conservation easement. It's all based on impervious cover and ground cover management. So management of native grasses, which are going to funnel more water into the aquifer. That's the purpose of them. But the land trust doesn't have any money unless they work strictly off of donations. Yeah. And some of the counties and some cities, like the city of San Antonio, SAWS, has had about a 5-year push to purchase conservation over the Western Edwards Plateau, to purchase easement rights there to conserve the recharge portions of their aquifer. One, to protect them from development, which, if it's all impervious cover, it all runs off. But 2, just to put an additional requirement for management where they're not overgrazed. Because if it's overgrazed, it becomes runoff also, especially in that limestone, rocky stuff. But I would love to see the state of Texas put some state funding behind those. We've had NRCS funding on certain projects that have, a certain historical or archaeological component to them. But mostly it's on the land trust to go raise private dollars.
Yeah.
And then you've got this demographic difference. You've got the traditional landowner, very conservative. And then you've got the people donating to the land trust, and they're naturalist. They don't always see eye to eye on things. And so trying to get the landowner to agree to conservation, because it's good long-term for agriculture. It's good long-term for hunting. We have a right to hunt and fish written into the Texas State Constitution. So it's good for habitat, for agriculture. These communities are going to have conserved, inserted, or stewarded oceans and makes in a long-term for long-term. The tractor dealers are going to be dependent on producers long-term. But getting them there has been a challenge. Yeah, it's been a real challenge. Max and I have sold quite a few of the remainder rights. We've sold quite a few ranches in the last few years that are in conservation, maybe an unprecedented amount in Central Texas. There's a broker in far West Texas that sells a bunch of it, and he used to be in the conservation business, and so it's not as new of an idea out there. Texas does have a couple of mountain ranges, and fortunately some of that has been conserved. But here in the center part of the state, it's mostly only been up against development, trying to conserve key properties, key pieces of open space up against development, San Antonio, city of Austin primarily, and then wetlands along the coast. And it's all been funded with private dollars that those land trusts have to operate with.
And that only goes so far, right?
Yeah, you run into a scale problem really quickly.
Yeah. Or you run into a focus on non-valuable land, right? Like it's because, okay, we need to conserve acres, right? If that's the goal, then you're going to go buy the cheapest acres you can find that are somewhat important, but you're not going to be conserving land in the triangle, right? Or, like in the high growth corridors, unless you just get a lucky donor, you get fortunate with a donor who wants to donate a bunch of money or donate a bunch of land. But that is sometimes a harder lift. And, when you really incentivize landowners to do something, and make it attractive to them, I think it's something everybody would get on board with. And it's a win, your conservatives like it, right? It's helping landowners, it's helping farmers, it's helping those kind of things, right? Preserve agriculture, preserve land. Then your Democrats like it, right? Because it's green, it's more parks, it's creating more green spaces, right? It should be a bipartisan effort at the state level, and your landowners, it's a program for them. They don't have to do it, but it's a way that they can monetize what they got, keep it. And it seems to be a win all the way around. It just comes down to funding and finding somebody in these states to kind of champion that bill moving forward and make it happen. But Florida has been a pioneer in that, and it's part of the reason that if you drive through parts of Florida, they're always going to look like old Florida, right? It's not everywhere. It's not in the heart of Tampa, but you get outside of some of these major metros, and all of a sudden you're seeing a part of Florida that you didn't know existed, and it'll be that way in perpetuity, which is great.
Yeah, I love it. And for the landowner that's got some income too, I think it's a great investment tool. I think it's a great tool for somebody that does in a high wealth, high income scenario to buy a piece of ground, conserve it. Let's say in your scenario, they were able to capture 50% of that in the conservation value. Well, they get to carry 50% of their annual adjusted gross income. They get to carry that forward for 15 years and take that as a deduction against their income taxes.
And if, here's the deal too, especially if you just bought a piece of property and you do an easement, that money's not taxable, right? I mean, it just reduces your basis on the asset. And if you're not planning to sell this thing ever, and you're planning to leave it to your kids, and they're going to get a step up in basis to fair market value on the date that you pass away, like, it's a no-brainer, right? If you're planning on flipping a property real quick and buying it, doing an easement, reselling, you have depreciation recapture and all that, and things of that nature. But if you're just buying something with a long-term hold in mind, and you don't want to develop it, you just want to use it for personal reasons or farm it, it's a no-brainer.
Yeah. Here in Texas, the trends have been over the last 30 years anyway. We'll see what the next 10 years looks like. But over the last 30 years, if you would have bought a piece of property, conserved it, of course, that's going to reduce the value. Depending on where it's at, it could reduce it 30%. It could reduce it 70%. If it's right up against development, we've seen ground you could purchase for large tracts, $30,000-$50,000 an acre. If you conserve it, it's probably worth 10 to 15. So there's your metric. But if you were to take that over the last 30-year trend, you could have still conserved that, taken the reduction in value, hold it 10 years, and still sell it for more than you bought it for, you and conserve.
Yeah, correct.
Because you're holding a piece of the scarcity of a big piece of ground. Man, the economies of scale are like working in reverse. If you can find a big tract that's within a couple of hours of town, you don't have many options. And so people are willing to overpay a little bit for those just to have a large tract to be able to hunt on, have some agriculture on, have some space, and they'll pay for that large tract.
One thing that has made Florida more attractive, in addition to weather and growth and all that, but there's still large tracts left in Florida. You go into some of these other southern states, there's a few, but those states are more volume states, right? It's from a brokerage standpoint, it's more transactions, fewer acreage. If you want to deploy $100 million in land, it's a lot harder to do it in Alabama than it is to do it in Florida, right? So I think Florida's been attractive historically to people because you can do a couple of transactions and kind of eat up your full allocation. Because there's just bigger tracts available and it's bigger dollar amounts. So for a lot of these private equity, family office institutional groups, it's been an attractive investment opportunity for them compared to a few of these other southern states where you just have to buy too many tracts. And you know the story. There's economies of scale a little bit when it comes to certain properties.
You put mitigation banking on. You establish mitigation banks on any of those?
Some, yeah. So that's a big business in Florida. We've done a few of them. We've sold some banks. We've certainly worked with landowners who have taken their property, done an easement on part of it, done mitigation on part of it. And in Florida, that's mitigation for wetlands. If you're a developer, you're coming in to develop a 100-acre subdivision, you got 5 acres of wetlands. Typically, you're buying offsite credits from a mitigation bank. And so, it can be $150,000 an acre, depending on what you're trying to mitigate, just from buying a credit perspective. Then you still have to fill it and bring dirt in and all that stuff. But so that's a big business. It's very complicated, very intense to do it, but there's big markets for it, and it's historically wetlands have been kind of the big driver of it. Now, gopher tortoises are another very attractive mitigation bank to a lot of people. If you are developing a site with gopher tortoises on it, you typically have to pay a bank to move those tortoises to the bank or buy offsite credits, and that can be anywhere from $5,000 to $8,000 a gopher tortoise. So if you're looking at doing a mitigation bank and you can get 2 or 3 tortoises per acre, and you're buying the property for $5,000 an acre, and you can get $8,000 a tortoise, and you get 2 per acre, that's a pretty good business model. Yeah, there's they dig, they burrow in these properties. You can typically walk out there and see if you see them. When you're developing a property to get your ERP permit, your environmental permit, all that, you've got to basically have somebody sign off that there's not tortoises on site, and if there are, you got to mitigate them to get your permit. And it's complicated and it's very interesting. And there's a million other species. We got sand skinks that we have in Florida. We just have all these random things that other people typically don't have, and they're each a little bit different in terms of what you have to do if they're there. But we just have so much wildlife and water and wetlands and protected species here because of the aquifer and things like that. Water's typically not an issue here, but it's a big problem when it comes to development land. Factoring in the ecological concerns and preserving some of that and making sure that animals and species are protected.
Has the state worked with the conservation landowners to provide some protection against eminent domain, condemnation for pipelines, highways, transmission lines? That's a challenge you ran into here in Texas.
In Texas, another very prominent, very wealthy, very well-known landowner who has a good bit of conservation land. And our first easements, the ranches, he bought a place that had a pre-existing easement on part of it, and then we conserved some more of it. And one of those easements was put into place, I'm going to say 50 years ago, Tyler. I had to go look. It has protection against condemnation for eminent domain. It has protection against being condemned for pipelines, roads, transmission, public utilities, et cetera. And that has really helped him. But now the statute does not allow for that anymore. So new easements don't allow for that. And one thing that we found up against these high growth areas is we saw a little bit of a pattern where people would go into conservation or commit to go into conservation. And really what that did is put a target on them for, well, here's where our new corridor for roads is going to go, right here. And now you're actually compensated less when they come take your property for road because they don't have to buy you by the square foot.
Yeah, I don't know about here in Florida, to be totally honest on that front. I know that when they are looking for or evaluating new road alternatives and where to put things and all that stuff that's in conservation is taken into account. You can't, there's certain roads in Florida that you drive through and you're like, man, this really needs to be like a 4-lane road based on the traffic. But I pull it up on our map and we're driving through, huge preservations and all that, or the Everglades or whatever. And you can't really widen your roads that much in there if you're not, and then you're going to be impacting,
I think if the state's putting their money in, they're not. I would think if the state's got money in it, they're not going to go condemn their own land, and maybe that's why here we see that as a target, is because the state doesn't have money in it.
Right.
They see it as the path of least resistance. It's cheaper to go condemn conserved ranch land than it is to go take houses and rooftops. That's the reality.
Right. Right. Yeah. It's just, we have major road challenges here in Florida. And, the issue is at some point, you can't widen some of these roads anymore. Right. Like we have that issue in Lakeland and some of our main north-south road. It's like you have basically 0 or 5-foot setbacks on the front of these downtown roads. Historically, this one kind of historic corridor we have, and it's the main north-south road that people drive 45, 50 miles an hour on. Like you can't widen that road anymore, right? And so that's going to be one of the concerns just long term is, okay, in Florida and Texas, in some of these growth markets, how do you move people, right? I mean, we have a Brightline high-speed rail now that connects Orlando all the way to Miami, privatized Brightline high-speed rail, which is fantastic. I took it going down there for a conference where I didn't need my car and I could work for 4 hours on the train, high-speed internet. It's actually pretty nice. But like, how do we move people in ways that don't put more demand on our infrastructure and thus not more pressure on our farmland and environmentally sensitive areas? I don't know. It's above my pay grade.
Thought we'd all been the Jetsons by now,
Yeah, right. That's the answer, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah. Man, Tyler, I appreciate it. I hope that you and I, Dean and Trent and Dan and Seth are going to do a lot more together. That's the plan, right? I think we're supposed to get together in June. But appreciate you guys. Look forward to working closer with you. As we have people in Florida, we're going to sure send them your way.
Thanks. Same here for Texas, and I appreciate everything you do for the industry and trying to, promote what different groups are doing and different people are doing. And you do a great job, and it's been a pleasure to be on here today. And we're recording this Memorial Day weekend, so I hope you have a great Memorial Day and enjoy some time with your family. And excited to see you soon, man.